Hello everybody, welcome back to another wonderful biology class. Today we're going to be looking at threats to biodiversity. And for this lesson, the focus question is, how can the decline of a single species affect an entire ecosystem? I actually kind of alluded to this in the last lesson, but I've got a nice picture of a happy last unicorn here. And how could the decline of that single species change an ecosystem? It's an interesting question. New vocabulary for today include background extinction, mass extinction, natural resources or natural resource, overexploitation, habitat fragmentation, edge effect, biological magnification, eutrophication, it's a fun one, and finally, invasive species. All great terms that relate to a loss of species diversity or biodiversity. Our review vocabulary is one that we've actually covered so far this year, and that is a food web, which is a model or representation of how organisms living in the same place at the same time would feed off of or interact with each other in usually a producer-consumer or predator-prey type relationship. So let's get started with the idea of background extinction. It turns out that, well, things are dying all the time. And I know that sounds a little self-evident, but some things die off and they're just gone forever because of the changing in the environment, because of a random volcano erupting and wiping out tens of square miles of forest. Sometimes it's because of a species being carried on a log to a new continent, and that new species kills off the entirety of an old species, right? There's a lot of reasons this background extinction happens, but sometimes some organisms just happen to die off. And the rate at which things just randomly die off because of natural chance, we'll say, or natural changes in environment, is called background extinction. And this is a constant thing. It happens all the time. There's always a constant kind of upkeep of background extinction. And that's throughout the history of the world. And that's in contrast to something called mass extinction, where you have some kind of cataclysmic event. In the past, it's been things like rapid cooling, and you got almost an entirely frozen Earth, and there was mass extinction, a huge drop in species diversity. Or you had a meteorite impact and kill off most of the dinosaurs, and that's a mass extinction. Or even right now, because of the using of the planet for our benefit, humans can be thought of as causing mass extinctions to certain types of ecosystems and a dramatic loss in biodiversity as a result. Now, it's important to note that we're talking about the modern mass extinction. Unlike nature's mass extinctions, we do keep things that are useful to us, right? It's called monocropping, and I had a picture related to that with fields of grain, and it's through what you might actually call purposeful extinction that we've increased the carrying capacity for ourselves. And as someone who is pro-human, I don't necessarily see this as an evil or bad thing. I do think we need to be more intentional about it and to be more considerate of the types of manipulations we are doing to the environment, because as a human population approaching and probably capping at about 9 billion, there's an awful lot of us, and we need to be careful that we don't push the Earth too far or to a place where we can't recover it through technology, because it's the only Earth that we have. So we need to be good stewards of our environment. And I think everyone can get behind that idea. But the idea that we're living in a mass extinction now can be somewhat debated in terms of what we define as species. because some scientists will say that a single frog species living only in 2 or 3 trees in the Amazon rainforest, well, when that frog species dies, it represents the extinction of that frog species. Even though 6 trees over, there might be a similar frog with a slightly different color pattern that physically is basically identical to the frog that died off, but because of its coloration pattern, might be thought of as a different species. So, how bad our current mass extinction is actually kind of depends on how narrow a definition of species you have. And that's something to consider for future policymakers of the world. Do you want to have a very narrow definition of species, in which case the current mass extinction rate is actually pretty high? Or do you want to have a more broad definition of species, in which case our mass extinction rate might actually be considerably lower than we are led to believe? That's a definitional thing, and I'm not going to give you the right or the wrong answer. It's just something for you to think about critically, and it's important because as the future stewards of the planet, it's something that you should think critically about. Are we in a mass extinction? I think we are. How bad is it? I think that's open to discussion and interpretation and should be thought about very critically and very carefully and with human thriving in mind. All right, that's all that I have for this half of today's lecture. Thank you so much for listening. I have some questions for you, and if you have questions for me, of course, please ask. Thanks for listening.